Well, friends, our scripture lesson for today is taken from the book of Exodus, chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it so that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Well, everything that's happened in the world has happened during this sermon series that we've been doing called The Real Glow Up, which is talking about becoming the person God knows that you can be. This is week 3 of the series. If you missed weeks 1 and 2, whatever medium you're using to watch this right now, whether it's fpce.live or maybe on Facebook Live, you can just scroll earlier to earlier messages in the series and catch the messages from weeks 1 and 2, from March 1st and March 8th, or you can go to our YouTube channel at fpce.us/YouTube and watch the messages there and catch up. In brief, in week 1, we talked about the problem of distractions, that even when we decide we want to become something, we're often derailed by things that distract us, and that most often the distractions we succumb to are good things, not bad things. It's often easier to say no to the bad thing, but the unessential good thing is the thing that gets us derailed. Then last week we talked about having a different perspective from which to think about what we can become. That instead of thinking of the next decision, the next choice that's right in front of us, we should take that higher view, that bigger look at our lives, the different perspective that lets us see the big picture and maybe points us in a different direction. So this week, we're having this story from the book of Exodus. And in this story, the people, remember, have been brought out from slavery. So they've been brought out from slavery in Egypt. And they were wandering in the wilderness. And they've encountered shortages before. And so when they complained about a lack of meat, God had sent them quails with which to eat. When they complained about a lack of bread, God gave them manna. And I'm sure that in that time, they would have complained about a lack of toilet paper. And we'll see how God provides in this day for that. But the people ask Moses. They go to Moses and they say, "Moses, we want water." And Moses knows that the issue they really have is with God, because God is the source of the provision. And so Moses says, why are you asking me? Why do you test the Lord? Okay? Why are you testing the Lord? Has not God provided for you already? Okay? And yet you don't trust. But the people, they aren't trusting. They're not remembering. And so they say, "Look, why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us?" They're forgetting where they had been. They're forgetting that they had been slaves. They're forgetting that their past and the past of their relationship with God was supposed to be an indicator of the future. They had not learned the lessons from the past that would sustain them through an uncertain present. They were not grateful for all that God had already done. And I think that happens so often to us in our lives. We need to remember that sometimes we may not be where we want to be, but we're not where we were. All right? We've made it this far. We're here. We've learned things. We've grown. Okay? And so we may not be where we want to be, but we are not where we were. And we need to take some time to be grateful for that, even though it can seem hard. But when it seems hard and we're feeling consumed by the problems that we're having in the moment, God still hears us. See, I love this piece where Moses goes to God and says, what shall I do? They are almost ready to stone me. It's such a practical problem. He doesn't go to God and say, dear God, what shall I do? Their theology is all wrong. Oh, dear God, what shall I do? They seem to not have the right frame of mind. No, Moses goes with a very practical problem that's going to impact him personally and deeply. They're ready to stone me. And God doesn't say, look, Moses, that shouldn't be what you're worried about. You should be worried about bigger pictures. You should be worried about the bigger goals of this. No, God says to Moses, I'll deal with it. Here's what you do, all right? Because one of the things is that God cares about practical problems. We don't worship a distant God who is divorced from the things that we face on a day-to-day basis. God cares about the practical problems in our lives. So we can go to God with our practical problems because God wants us to build a world that reflects God's values, it reflects God's kingdom. And that's practical. That's about the here and the now. So we can go to God with our practical problems, but the solutions will come rooted in God's values. The solutions will come rooted in what God desires for us. And so God tells Moses to do a couple of things. God says to Moses, look, go on ahead of the people. Take some of the elders of Israel with you, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. Now, he's telling Moses, all right, first of all, continue to lead. Continue to lead. Continue to be the leader of the people. Go on ahead of them. Take some witnesses. Because when I do what I'm going to do, all right, you're going to have people who see this, who are trusted by the people. So don't just take anybody, take the elders, take the persons who are respected within the community with you to witness what's going to happen, and take the staff. Take that staff which had been with you, that you had used in many miracles before. Take that staff. You had parted the Red Sea with that staff. Take that staff with you. And then go to this special place. Go to the rock at Horeb. It's believed that Horeb is another name in the ancient world for Sinai, for Mount Sinai. And so this is the place where God gave them the gift of the Ten Commandments. All right, this is a very special place. Go to that place. You were given the Ten Commandments there. And let's always remember that the law is a gift. The commandments were a gift to the people. All right? Because we don't want to be people who are directionless. We don't want to be people who just do our own thing. All right? The law is a gift. Otherwise, we have anarchy. Otherwise, we have rampant selfishness. Otherwise, we have all the things that can go wrong in a society. The law is a gift that helps us relate to one another and relate to God in a good and orderly, peaceful way. And so we are grateful for those things. And so in this, God has told Moses that you need to go to a place. You need to have an instrument. And you need to have witnesses. And these are wonderful ingredients for us to think about our past, all right? We can think about where we've been. We can think about a place where God had been good. Think about an instrument, a means that God had given to overcome a problem. And then think about witnesses. Think about testimony. Testimony is such an important thing in our lives. And we think about that word and it reminds us of court. But it's really, testimony is the kind of thing that we can do for one another. See, sometimes we get into a place where we forget that things have been good or things can be good. And you always need that one friend, those two friends who will say to you, don't lose heart, don't lose faith. Remember, you can do it. Remember, things are possible. And we can be that for others. So we need to remember the places where God has been good. We need to remember the means that God has given us in order to overcome problems in our lives. And we need to be people who reinforce those memories with one another when we need to hear them from one another. And these kinds of things exist in our past if we're willing to sit down, be reflective, and think about them. So I encourage you to think about these questions. When have you struggled? When have there been struggles in your life that you overcame? When have you been able to do that? How did you persevere? Right? How did you get from there to where you are? How did you get from before the issue to after it? And then what did you learn in that process? What did you learn? It can be a skill. It can be something about yourself. You can learn that you have an inner strength. You can learn that you have the ability to learn, or you can learn very specific things. See, one thing about these questions, when did you struggle? How did you persevere? When did you learn? There's a real tendency in our minds, I think, to go to the biggest, hardest place and often the least successful one. Because we remember the times where things were really bad. Just as the Israelites forgot the times when God got them through. See, they needed meat, they got quail. They needed bread, they got manna. They forgot that really quickly. And I'll bet you that your mind didn't immediately go with these questions to the things you overcame in your life most readily. The kinds of things I'm talking about there are, we've all had a day where we wake up and there's a problem in front of us. And it seems like it could be the kind of problem, maybe not, I'm not talking about a life-threatening problem. I'm talking about the kind of problem that ruins your day. The kind of problem that would make a dent in your pocketbook. You know, the thing that breaks in the house and you wake up in the morning and say, oh, this is awful. I'm going to have to take a day off work, 2 days off work while we repair it. And this is going to happen. It's going to cost, hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands of dollars. And then somehow you figure out, I can fix this. I know how to fix this. You learn about it. Someone tells you about it. You read about it, whatever. And you run to Home Depot. And you get $20 worth of parts, and you fix it and you make it better. That's actually an example of a tough time, a struggle. And somehow you found it within yourself to solve that problem. And you picked up a skill in the process. And when you picked up that skill, that kind of problem never scared you again. The next time you think that might be happening, you're like, I got this. I know what to do. I know what aisle to go to at Home Depot. I know where to get those parts. I know exactly how to put this together. And then when a problem comes up that's kind of similar to that, you think the same way. Hey, I can figure this out. And that's actually how many things work in our lives. So many things in our lives actually have worked that way. We had a problem. It seemed daunting. It seemed like more than we could deal with in the moment. It seemed like something that could really throw us off our game for a little while. But then we figured out a solution, and that problem was never a problem again. And sometimes we learned how to solve it in such a way that it became kind of a hobby, or maybe you even used that knowledge to help a neighbor with the same problem. Somebody comes to you and says, this is going wrong, it's terrible, I'm going to have to deal with fixing this. And you go, no problem. I know how to do it. And those are the kinds of things we often forget too easily because we overcame them so completely that they stopped seeming to be a problem in our minds because we had solved it. And when it stopped seeming to be a problem in our mind, we forgot that it was ever a problem at all. But when we forget that it had been a problem, we forget that we were able to surmount it. We forget that we had the ability to get past it. We forget what it taught us about facing the next problem that seems like it's going to be really difficult to surmount. So one of the things that I want you to consider is this. What if God intends that you will use everything that you've learned? As we think about what God wants us to become, as we think about being the person God knows we can be, a piece of that is perhaps the sum of all of these things that we've learned along the way. That we've picked up all these lessons, we've picked up all these skills, we've picked up all this confidence, and maybe all those things kind of point to something that we can become. Think of all the things that you know how to do well. And think about how those things could be used to brighten someone's life. And that's a way of living into the person God knows you can be in a godly way. Taking the things that you've learned, taking what you've acquired, and putting it to use in accord with God's values. Values of love, values of sharing, values of compassion. So we need to do more remembering of our past. And that was really big in the Israelite tradition. See, after this happened, what did they do? They named the place. See, they named the place. He called the place Massah and Meribah. They named the place because something important happened there. They didn't want to forget. They named the place so they wouldn't forget, and they named it because it was where they asked this question, is the Lord among us or not? How many times have you been in a place where you have wondered, is God with me or not? Is the Lord with me or not? And that answer is yes. That answer is always yes. But sometimes we go through that period where we feel the need to ask the question. We discover anew that the answer is yes. And we need to name that place in our lives and remember it for the next time we might ask that question. You see, gratitude for our past is a launching point for the future. I like to think of all those things that happened as, like points. Like sometimes you see points on a graph, on a chart. But one of the things that happens is when you see those points, sometimes you understand that those points are actually making a line. And I think those points at which we have encountered more fully the presence of God in our lives are points that create a line, and that line leads to our future. So if we can recall all those points in our past where we've overcome, where we've acquired skills, where we've learned, and then say, okay, what kind of line does that make? What kind of line does that make? I think that line begins to point us toward how we can become the person God knows we can be. Next week is going to be week 4 in this series on the Real Glow Up. We hope that you'll be able to watch us online. We don't expect to be back here in person for a while.